Hi, this is Scott Lanser, the Director of Associates for Biblical Research. This is the second episode where we would be discussing Henry's research project on the Genesis 5 and 11 genealogy and chronology project.
You know, we talked about this movement in evangelical Old Testament scholarship to say that the meaning of a text is dependent on the expert's interpretation of the external evidence. The Bible is unique in that it is the speech of God. It doesn't need an external authority to authenticate it or to make it clear or sufficient or authoritative. Another pernicious influence on the whole issue of hermeneutics in the church has been really the influence of postmodernism. And that is sort of relativism. Now, another term that I use in the articles is what we call comparative archaeological method. Now, this goes back about 100 years to William F. Albright. He was wonderful because he did a major pushback against all the liberal scholarship. But one of the things that snuck into the church through Albright was that Albright wanted to get rid of Christian confessional commitments and treat the Bible like, quote, any other ancient text. But the problem is, the Bible is not just any other text. It's the Word of God.
I think this is probably a good time for us to take a look at the life of Abraham.
We're going to begin with Abraham and work backwards, because what a lot of people do is they want to make a hard separation between Genesis 1 to 11 and the life of Abraham. It's a very inconsistent hermeneutic. No, you know, those texts are based on mythological stories, and the general principle there is that God is the creator and sin came into the world, but they don't really mean what they say in the sense of what they actually say when you interpret them carefully. But everybody intuitively knows that's a Christian that once you get to Abraham, you start employing that method, and you look at how dependent the New Testament is on Abraham. Now, Genesis 25, 7 and 8 tells us that Abraham lived to be an old man and full of years, and he died at the age of 175. Now, the immediate reaction is, oh, there's got to be some other way to interpret that, often is the reaction. Or the reaction should, as in my judgment, should be, what else does the Bible say about the life of Abraham related to that age? And it turns out that there is a very precise chain of events that occur in the life of Abraham, begin with Abraham's birth, right? And you walk from Genesis 11:26 all the way to 25, 7 through 8. And you see a continuum of chronology through his life. Abraham marries Hagar, and then she gets pregnant. And then we see the birth of Ishmael 1 year later. And then the text tells us very specifically that Abraham was 86 years old when this happened. 75 plus 10 plus 1 is 86. And then independently, Genesis 16:16 says that Abraham was 86 years old. And this is the example of the approach that we're trying to take to try to dismantle these views of symbolizing the numbers. Isaac is born at age 100, 99 plus that time the next year. Little phrases like that in the Old Testament narrative. All these indicators tell us that Abraham's 175 years old. The implication for that is not only that fact, but as you work backwards into Genesis 11, we see the ages go up all the way back to Shem to 600. And this is all interconnected. The logic of the biblical narrative is interconnected. Shem at 600, Noah 950, and then there's a falling off of the ages. Now, theologically, that's been interpreted in the history of the church. That longevity was intended to be eternal, infinite, right? To live forever. And then there's been this degradation in human society of the fall off the ages. But we have Abraham at 175. The only way to explain his age is as we work our way backwards, because this is exactly what Jacob does in Genesis 47. He's standing before the Pharaoh, and Pharaoh asks him, how old are you? And he tells him, I am 130 years old. And he not only tells him that, he tells him that those came before me, my forefathers, the lengths of the days of their sojourning were longer. And that's exactly what we find in the biblical text. And then the text goes on to tell us that he lived 17 years in Egypt and died at the age of 147. 130 plus 17 is 147. And it turns out that his age did turn out to be shorter than the time of the sojourning of his three previous ancestors. So the idea that Genesis 11 backwards should be hermeneutically treated differently than Abraham's life forward is inconsistent hermeneutic, and I say we should reject it.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We do pray that this will help and bless you in your study of the Word of God. Thank you for joining us.